So let's now work on this add place screen file here, on this add place Dart file. In there, of course, as always, we add a new class, add place screen, sounds like a fitting name, where I'll extend stateful widget here, stateful widget, because I will manage some user input here. And therefore here, I of course then also add my constructor function, where I accept and forward my key. And we add this create state method here, which returns a state that's connected to an add place screen. And of course, therefore, we also must add this underscore add place screen state class, which extends state. And state is a generic type, as you learned, connected to add place screen here. And then in there, we add the build method. And now in create state, we can return a new instance of add place screen state like this. In this build method, we then want to return our input elements in the end that allow the user to input the data for a new place. And I'll start by adding a scaffold because this is a new standalone screen. So of course I want to do all that basic screen setup. For example, add an app bar as pretty much always, where I'll set a title that is add new place, wrapped in a text widget though. So here we have add new place like this. And of course, then we also have our body. And we could outsource this body into a new widget, a new standalone widget if we wanted to. But here I'll instead display a column and handle it all in this one single file, which I will actually wrap with a single child scroll view to make sure that it's always scrollable and all parts of that column can always be reached, no matter what your device size or orientation may be. So therefore, I'll wrap this in single child scroll view. But then in this column, I want to have the different inputs. And here we could wrap this all into a form and use these form features about which you also learned earlier in the course. And if you did that, that's of course absolutely fine. Here I'll keep things a bit simpler and I'll therefore just use the regular text field for rendering a text input element that allows the user to enter a title. Now to tell the user that they should enter a title here, I'll add my decoration parameter and set this to an input decoration object using Flutter's input decoration class so that I can set my label to a text widget that says title. By the way, alternatively, there also is a label text parameter which you could set, which directly allows you to set your label text without having to add that extra text widget. Both is possible, and since I haven't shown you this parameter before, I will do it here. So with that, I set a label on this text field. In addition, I want to add a controller to let Flutter manage the user input for me. Now you learned about controllers earlier, and if you did not use a controller, but you maybe instead manually managed the input by listening to onChanged and updating some variable whenever this event triggers, that's also fine. But here I'll use such a controller, and in add place screen state, I will therefore add a new underscore title controller, which is a text editing controller. And as you learned, if you do use such a controller, you should also dispose of it. So I will add dispose here and access my title controller to then call dispose on it. And with that added, I can use the title controller here as a value for controller on this text field to make sure that the user input is managed by Flutter for me and I can conveniently extract it when I need it later. And this here can be const now, this input decoration. And with that, I got this title text field all set up. Now later, we'll add more inputs to this screen here. We'll allow the user to pick an image and to choose a location. But for the moment, a title is all I need. And therefore, with that added, the only other thing I want to add to this column is an elevated button that can be used to save that input, to submit it. I will also add a sized box between the text field and the elevated button to add some vertical spacing by setting the height here to, let's say, 16. Of course, you can play around with that value though. And then here on the elevated button, I'll set the child to a text widget where I say add place. And this can be set to a const widget by adding const. And we must add the function as a value for onPressed that should be executed when that button is pressed. So that's also something I'll add here. And some commas for better formatting. And I will actually even tweak that elevated button and convert it to an icon button, so that then I have to set the label to control which text will be displayed, and I have to add an icon parameter so that I can also show an icon in addition to this text. So here for that I create a new icon by using the add icon again. Now doing so is of course totally optional, but that's the style or the look I'd like to have here. Now one additional thing I want to do is I want to add some padding around my column, and the column itself doesn't have a padding. It also has no margin parameter that I could set. Now we could wrap column in a padding widget, and that would be absolutely fine, but conveniently, if you take a look at the parameters provided by single child scroll view, you can see that there we can also set a padding. So since I used single child scroll view here, which of course you might not have done, which is also fine, but since I used it here, I can use that to add a padding by setting const edge insets and then adding a padding of 12 in all directions. And that's then this finished add place screen, at least for the moment. And of course, now I want to take a look at it and be able to navigate to it. And navigating to it should be possible from inside the places screen, because that's where I got this icon button in my actions list in my app bar. So here when we press this, I want to navigate to this add place screen. And now you can add your navigation logic here in this anonymous function or in a standalone method. And here, since I will also need to use context and it will be readily available in this build method, I'll go for this anonymous function approach instead of adding a standalone method, which would then need to accept the context as an argument. Therefore, I'll do it right in here in this anonymous function that's assigned to onPressed and access the built-in navigator class and create it with of context so that we can then access push and push a new screen onto the stack of screens. And as you learned, you typically push a material page route then, which has that builder where you get a context and then return the screen, or the widget to be precise, that should be loaded as a screen. And here I'll of course return const add places screen. Like this. That's my navigation logic here. And with all of that added, we should be able to save this, maybe force a reload. And if I now click on plus, I'm taken to this add new place screen, which doesn't have too much content, but looks good for now, which has this add place button, which of course doesn't do anything just yet, but where I can also go back and forth. And that all works, and therefore now the next step is to make sure that as we enter something here, I also save that. And now that I did enter something here, I see one last adjustment we should make, because that's pretty hard to read here. We should go to this add place screen, and in there make sure that this text in this text field is always readable. This can be achieved by setting the style parameter here, which allows us to set a style for the text that is being edited. And here I could again use theme of context to use one of the built-in text styles, but I'll instead create a new text style just by creating a new text style object where I set the color to theme of context, color scheme, and then there the on background color, which should be some whitish color. With that, this looks much better. So now I got this, and now I want to make sure that pressing add place also creates a new place that is then shown on that list. And for that, as mentioned, we will use Riverpod.